So, this is the outline of our 3 weeks. And we had introduction, historical perspective. Then today we're going to talk about Judaism's Messiah. And then next week we'll cover Christianity's Messiah and the differences and have some conclusions. We'll do a little review of last week. Most of you were here last week. Okay, so the timeline for Jewish history, we have from the beginning, we have, God created the world for his glory. There's the first man, Adam and Eve, the fall. The fall led to the beginning of blood sacrifice. And then we discussed, I went over kind of just a little geography, put it in place in the world, and we talked about a whole bunch of terms that we'll be using throughout. And anybody have any questions about those? And we go into the historical perspective. Anybody have questions about terms? I don't want to go through them again, but okay. So then we did a little historical perspective. And of course, on my little timeline of, we're in this period here about 200 years on both sides of the birth of Christ. That's kind of the period we're going to be focusing on, because that is the period of time that I believe kind of is the foundation of what Jews believe today. And what Jews believe today has changed over time. I mean, Jewish belief has changed over time. So it all kind of happened. There was a lot of stuff that happened in that period of time. So just to kind of get us up to that period, so we have the creation, the fall, we have the Noah's flood, we have the age of the patriarchs, we had Joseph, ended with Joseph and the Israelites living in Egypt or in captivity, Moses and the Israelites. And at that, we talked about when they were in the desert, atonement became an issue. They built the golden calf. They weren't patient. And Moses formalized and introduced the whole Jewish concept sacrificial system, starting with there will be a tabernacle. It's very, very detailed explanation of that tabernacle. That's where you will do sacrifices, animal sacrifices for the atonement. And the Jewish priesthood started at that time. The Jews kind of moved from a patriarchal type leadership to a priesthood, where the priest became more of this, certainly the spiritual leaders of the Jewish peoples. That happened when they were in the desert. In fact, it began about 3 months after they left Egypt at Mount Sinai. That's when that all happened. Of course, then we have the conquest, the judges, and the early prophets. Then enter the kings, Saul, David, Solomon, and the first temple. And remember, the temple replaced the tabernacle, which was a tent. But the Jews at this time, by this time, the Jews have been practicing this for hundreds of years. The tabernacle existed in a place for hundreds of years, 400 or so. It was then moved to Jerusalem, then the temple was built. It replaced the tabernacle or the tent. Okay? Then the kingdom divides, time goes by, the Assyrians overthrow the northern kingdom of Israel. They disperse the Israelites, replace them, kind of the first, if you will, part of what I talked about weeks ago about the diaspora, the first kind of major migration of Jewish people away from Israel. Then we had the Babylonian conquest, happened 100 or so years later, when the Babylon has conquest over Judea, the southern kingdom. They destroy the temple. Really important. They destroy the temple and they exile a lot of Jews. Tens of thousands are taken to Babylon north. Tens of thousands escape down into Egypt. So at this time we have, Jews kind of in three areas. You have men, just want you to think about this. You have Jews up in Babylon, tens of thousands, still Jews in Israel, and tens of thousands of Jews in Egypt. This kind of becomes important as we move along. Then, and by the way, we now enter what we see in the Bible is the silent period. This 400 years between the Old and New Testament, I don't think was very silent. There's a lot of stuff happening. And from a Jewish perspective, it absolutely was not a silent period. A lot of things happened to the Jews during this period of time. So the Medes and Persians, Medo-Persians, they conquer Babylon about 70 years after the Israelites were taken in exile, about 70 years later. They take over. And we talked about this. They had a whole different philosophy, if you will, about what happened with their captives. Most places had a very harsh way of dealing with captives. In Babylon, they weren't. It was actually, they were allowed to integrate, but they weren't allowed to really practice their religion. The Medo-Persians had a different philosophy. They thought there's no right reason for people not to practice their religion and their culture. And so Cyrus, the king of the Medo-Persians, allowed the Jews who wanted to go back to Jerusalem to do a couple things. To rebuild their temple, to reinstitute their culture, to rebuild Jerusalem and the temple. So those things happened as a result of the Medo-Persians. So Zerubbabel and Jeremiah and Ezra, they're all involved in this at this time, okay? We're still reviewing last week. Okay, so we enter this silent period. So we have the Macedonians, the Greeks, Alexander the Great, who conquers the Medo-Persians. And we talked a lot about Alexander the Great in the past. He was fast. He had the SEAL team of the time. But in 10 years, the whole world is now, the known world is converted to this Hellenistic system under Alexander the Great. But he dies early. His kingdom gets divided into 5 parts, headed up by one of his generals. His children didn't survive, by the way, Alexander's. And we talked about the 2 most important as far as the Jews are concerned, the Seleucid Empire, which was one of Alexander's generals, and they're to the north. Initially they include Israel and up and to the north into what would be the Tigris-Euphrates Valley. It's a very large part of the Hellenistic Empire, and the Ptolemaic group, which was over Egypt. So those were the 2 major. And we talked about that Israel is just strategic here in the middle. It's economically very strategic. It's the middle. It's all where all the trade routes come. And so over years, there's battles between these 2 Hellenistic emperors over control of Israel. So at different times, Israel is under the control of one or the other, most of the time under the Seleucids. So at this time, we have the Jews, like I said, they're dispersed. So we have a lot of them think about where they're controlled by. The ones in Israel, the ones in the Tigris Euphrates, the Seleucid ones, that group, tens of thousands of Jews, maybe a million or so, they're under the Seleucid. They are really harsh. This kingdom, they're harsh in how they treat their people they're over. Where the Ptolemaics down in Egypt is a much more liberal society. So to the north, the Jews are oppressed. To the south, they're very liberal, and they kind of flourish. They flourish in the south. In fact, they actually developed quite a culture down there in the south, and we're going to lead into this today. And including, they actually had a temple in Egypt. So we have the temple in Jerusalem, the main one, but there's another one, which mostly don't know about, but there's another one in Egypt. Okay? So things are starting to change at this time. We talked about this before, but we know from the writings in the scripture that there probably was written the Bible, the Torah. We talked about the Torah, Moses' law, and the Talmud, the Jewish Old Testament, was probably written down sometime before that, but we really don't have any evidence other than references to that. But during this period of time, the Greeks, the Ptolemaics, they want, because they have this massive library in Alexandria and they're collecting all this knowledge, and so they want a copy in their library of the Jewish Bible. So they facilitate the development of this translation, which is called, today we call it the Septuagint, which is a Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible. That happens in about 200, 250 BC. When the first part is the first 5 books, over the next 100 years, the rest of the Tanakh, the rest of the Old Testament, is translated into Greek. Okay? That is housed in Egypt. Okay? The structure of things at that time, this Hellenistic influence is happening in the area of Israel, and from what we can tell, this is kind of when these different sects of the Jewish religion started to emerge. We have the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Essenes, the Herodians, numerous sects. They all started in this period, this Hellenistic period. And so there was changes. The whole patriarchal system seems to be less important, and the role of these religious leaders, some priests, some aren't priests, but they're starting to influence things. And we talked about the difference between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, kind of important. The Pharisees believed in the whole Tanakh, the whole Jewish Bible, but they also believed in all these oral traditions, which were not written down. Where the Sadducees, they believed in the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, and they were very, very temple-centric. So the whole sacrificial system, that area of the priesthood, the Sadducees were the keepers of that. In fact, there was the Sanhedrin starts in that time, which is a Jewish semi-judicial group, yeah, and that had to be led by the chief priest, the high priest, who had to be a Pharisee. A Sadducee. So
Why is that? Why did it happen?
Well, I think because they were they moved in to be the high priest because they were the keeper of the temple. So that's the center of their essence. The Essenes, which is another sect, and they don't like the way things are going off, and they kind of just go off to themselves and start, kind of a culture of almost like a commune, and they're, what's that?
Dead Sea Scrolls came from.
Okay, and they are the keepers and the ones that developed all those scrolls that we call the Dead Sea Scrolls. So this is all happening in this period of time. At the same time, the Seleucids, who are over Israel, they are clamping down on the Jews. They are just, they're being brutal, and they desecrate the temple. They desecrate the temple. That is the straw that breaks the camel back with the Jews. There's a group called the Maccabees, the Herodian dynasty. At that time, when that happened, the desecration of the temple happened, they start a revolt against the Seleucids. They have a revolt. The leader of the revolt, he dies fairly early, but they push out and overthrow the Seleucids, kick them out. And for 100 years, about 100 years, the Jews are in charge of Israel. It's their nation again. They rededicate, purify, and rededicate the temple. That's what we call Hanukkah, is the celebration of that event. I did mention back on the Atonement, that's when the Jews celebrate Yom Kippur, is the Day of Atonement. This is Hanukkah, which is their celebration of when the Maccabees took over, got the temple back, purified it, and reconsecrated the temple. Okay, so there's a lot of change that's happening with the Jewish religion. It's a lot of change. They've changed their whole focus. So you've got the religious leaders have even more control than the patriarchs, and the whole patriarchy is not that important. So after the silent period, of course, at the time when the Maccabees take over Israel, they enter into a treaty with the up-and-coming empire of Rome. So they entered into a treaty, and they were kind of like there to help if they needed. They didn't end up not needing them, but they got a foot in the door, the Romans. And in 60 or so BC, the Romans move into Israel, and they take over Israel. There's not really a battle or anything. They just took over, and ends the Jewish rule of their nation. And so the Roman Empire, which is somewhat tolerant of your religion, kind of like, as long as you pay our taxes, obey our laws, they kind of let you do what you want. But over time, that changes, and they become more and more harsh towards the Jews. And there's just a lot of stress starting to build up within the whole Jewish culture, and it kind of culminates. So there's zealots. That's another there's several kinds of zealots, but these are people who want to, by force, throw the Romans out. So they have a revolt in AD 66. There's a revolt, and the Romans are ready for this. And, well, it's kind of interesting because we heard of Josephus. he comes into play here because Josephus is a Jew. He's kind of a general in the Jew. So when the Romans came in, they were attacking. Initially, they sent one legion down from Syria down into Egypt, and these zealots, under the direction of, well, I'm not sure how much, he was one of the leaders of the Jewish people up in the north end, they defeat this legion of Romans. Okay, so the Romans aren't going to take this. They bring in like 6 legions plus another 2 in reserve, and they're going to squash this whole Jewish rebellion. So that happens. So in AD 70, the Romans destroy the temple. Shortly after that, they destroy all of Jerusalem. 2 years later, down in Egypt, they destroy the other temple. And so there's this conflict going on, kind of civil war going on, until about 135 AD, in which one of the Jews, they have another all-out revolt, and the Romans have enough. That's when they destroy everything. They destroy the Jews. They send them basically all over. So it was really, it's a lot of stress here for the Jews. And the important thing to realize here is what happens when you destroy the temple. You've destroyed their whole system, their whole Jewish system. You don't have a temple where you have to give sacrifice. So no temple, no sacrifice. And you don't need these priests, these Sadducees for sure. We don't need them. Yes?
I'm assuming many of those priests were being killed during that time.
What's that?
I'm assuming when they conquered those temples, that many of the priests would have been killed.
So the Sadducees, or the temple priests, they're either killed or dispersed. Okay? But this was Judaism at the time. The whole atonement and the sacrificial system. That was what Judaism was. Sure, they had, we'll talk about this in a minute, they did have this concept that there will be a Messiah, but that wasn't the important stuff. The important stuff was this sacrificial system. And so it is crumbling. So that's going to just lead us in. Let's talk about the Jewish Messiah. Let's get out of this setting that things are really bad for the Jews. And they're kind of at a loss as to what's going to happen. So we'll stop for just to think about Messiah, because that's what we're here to talk about, is the Jewish Messiah this week. And so the Messiah is a term that means the anointed one. So that's, when you anoint somebody, that's setting them aside, giving a blessing of God. So one way of looking at Messiah could be a lot of people. Kings were anointed, right? I got some references here. Aaron was anointed, Saul was anointed, David was anointed. People are anointed. They are not the Messiah, they are messiahs. So in Jewish history, messiahs is kind of a general term meaning anointed. Service to serve, the service of God. So throughout their history, the people that there will be, though, a Messiah is going to come, and he will restore the Davidic kingdom. So all during this time, David is the one, as far as Jews are concerned. He's the model of what a good Jew is, right? And so they believe that there's going to be a Messiah, that's going to restore the Davidic kingdom, and he's going to create a perfect world. So their definition of that is happening. And their fervor, if you will, for this concept of this Messiah, capital M, kind of goes back and forth. When they're being persecuted and under oppression, their feeling for the Messiah coming is stronger. When things are going well, it's not so much. But they're ready for the Messiah. I wanted to say that. And we're not going to go through this in detail at all, but there's some principles of the Jewish faith. These are things that are documented. Like I said, I think last week, since this time of the destruction of the temple, more and more things are documented. So over time, things grow. And we talked about the Talmud and the Mishnah and all those things. And in about AD 1000 or so, there was a very famous Jewish rabbi, sage, if you will, of the Jewish people, known by Rambam, and he documented the principles of the Jewish faith, and these are pretty much what the Jews believe in this. But it's important, I want to point out one of them here. They believe, this is one of their principles of their faith, they believe there will be arrival of a Messiah and a messianic era. Okay? So this whole idea of a Messiah coming is very integral to the Jewish faith. Was starting then, is even stronger now. Yes?
So, who do they think the Messiah is? Like, who do they think that is?
We'll get to that. Thank you. I think we'll get there. But I mean...
all this, but they don't say anything about who he is.
Well, I have a list, actually, of about 30 or so people through history that some people thought were the Messiah. So they got a big list. There's probably 5 that were considered the biggies. Jesus was one who they believed was a potential Messiah. And the guy that led the revolution against the Romans in AD 35, he was one. And throughout time, there have been other significant ones. We're not going to go into those in detail, but the main idea in their faith is that the world will work, at some point in time, is going to work together under the leadership of the Messiah, and they're going to create this perfect world filled with godliness. Everything is going to become righteous. This is what they believe is going to happen, utopia. They do believe in the afterlife, and they believe that it doesn't matter your culture, your denomination, or whatever, whether you're in the afterlife depends on if you live a godly and moral life and follow the moral code, which they define basically as the Torah. Okay? So, that's kind of where things were. So, the characteristics, so it's kind of hard to pull some of this. I look at a lot of different stuff and we're trying to pull together what was their definition of Messiah. And so I kind of come up with this list of characteristics based on stuff that's documented today. Kind of hard to tell how far back these beliefs, but I think they went back a long way. So the characteristic the Messiah is going to reestablish the Davidic kingdom in Jerusalem. Okay, that's a major characteristic. That Messiah will rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. Now I say this is time because think about it. When all these things started, When Jesus was walking the earth and called the Messiah, he didn't rebuild the temple. It wasn't even destroyed, right? So this is, I think they add this kind of later, you know.
Doesn't that just set the stage for the Antichrist, though? 'Cause
What's that?
doesn't this just set the stage from the Jewish perspective for the Antichrist? Everything that you see going on is what is going to happen during the tribulation time.
Yeah.
Yeah, they don't stress things like the Antichrist.
But that's why.
I mean, we do, but I mean, they don't. So,
But they'll believe that many of the Jews will believe that the Antichrist is the Messiah. That's what the abomination.
oh yeah, so they believe that there's a lot of reasons why people are false messiahs, and thus of the devil. Okay, so, and they believe that the Messiah was going to end the exile of the Jews. They were going to all come back. Of course, those things didn't happen when Jesus was walking the earth. So I know that's something that was probably added later. They're going to keep the Torah like David. They think David was the premier, ultimate keeper of the Torah. And that this Messiah is going to follow the whole written and oral tradition. I mean, this is a Jew that really believes in everything. And he will fight wars of God, which leads into, you know, Frank's going to talk in a couple of weeks about the end times. But the Messiah is a military leader. Okay, so other qualities. So the qualities of this person that had these characteristics were he has a steep knowledge of the Torah, can teach, he's really knowledgeable, more knowledgeable than anybody about that. He must be a warrior, fighter. I thought it was interesting, they believe he needs to be a musician. They believe back in some of their writings that other than Moses, prophetic stuff doesn't come to you unless you're a musician. It was through music that the whole prophetic thing is expressed. I thought that was interesting, but they believe that.
Is that a David thing? Like, because David in his
Yes,
heart, like,
of course, yes.
If David was the ultimate, then of course
Right.
the Messiah would be the musician.
And by the way, the Messiah will be a family man. He will be married, have children. Really important. Okay? And he was born not religious, but becomes religious. So this is the qualities of this person, the characteristics of this person they believed would be the Messiah. Today, maybe before I figure, so that's what they believe will be the Messiah. So they believe you can take these things and you can test those. Anybody who you believe is the Messiah, you could test them against these things. And if they don't meet all this criteria, they're not the Messiah. Okay, and like I said, they've had, 60, I've got a list of at least 30, and there's 5 significant ones that they believe over time was believed to be the Messiah, and he doesn't meet this criteria, so he falls out. Jesus, of course, didn't meet all those, so he didn't count. But if we look at today's Judaism, I think it's kind of interesting. So we have Orthodox Jews, we have conservative Jews, and we have Reform Jews, or progressive Jews. So their take on the Messiah is slightly different. The Orthodox and the conservative view that the Messiah is not a man God, but will have the power of God and manifest. He's going to have all these qualities of a prophet, a priest, the king of Israel, and they define the Messiah as having got 2 roles: this conqueror, military type person, and this leader, man of peace. And there's some Jewish sects who believe that there was 2 messiahs. There will be 2 messiahs, a military one who will fight the wars and die, and then there's a different messiah that comes in to lead. So it depends on what your flavor of, but they believe in a person here.
But
The-
but you say, view the Messiah as a God-man.
He's not, okay, we believe Jesus is God.
Right. I don't believe that.
No, Jesus can't be God.
Can't be God.
It's got to be a man, no God man. The reformers, they're much more liberal, and they believe there's not going to be a Messiah, it's going to be this messianic age. And at that messianic age, all these things are going to happen, but it's going to, I'm sorry, it's very much one world order to me, their beliefs. That there's just going to be this, the people of the world are going to unite and they're going to become righteous and, it's going to happen, it's going to morph. So I think it's kind of like one world order-ish. So the definition of the Messiah is kind of morphed over time, and they have very strong beliefs as to why, what we believe is not true. So we talked about the stress on the system at the time of the Second Temple. They believe that this Masonic hope was very strong. So at this time is one of those times of stress and oppression. So their feeling that the Messiah's coming was very strong at that time because there were just things going wrong everywhere. And so they felt that. But Jesus was living at that time, but according to the Jewish teaching, he did not fit the description of the promised Messiah because he said he was God. Can't be. And other things. But he didn't fit. But at the time, that heresy, that was a biggie. He said he was God. Okay? And so it was just more stress. All these things are going on. You have these different sects and cultures within Judaism that are pulling. So, what we call Christians, or that sect of Judaism, was very much a part of Judaism. But it's a growing part. But it's a small part at the time of Christ. It's fairly small. It grows. But it's just another one of the pressures with the Romans and all these other things happening. It's just one more stress point on them. And like I talked about, when the temple was destroyed, that was kind of the end of the sacrificial system. So in a place called Yavna, which is if I remember the map, this town of Yavna was somewhere between like Caesarea and Jerusalem. In there somewhere was this town. And one of the famous Jewish rabbis at the time, very, very a sage, had a school. And he convinced the Romans at the time that he needed to continue his school and continue the religious practice and be able to train, Jewish leaders in the religion. And they went along with it. So from that point, it became the Jewish religious center, Yavna, for a period of time. It became the center of Jewish religion, not because Jerusalem's destroyed. So they're now regrouping, if you will, down here. And he kind of reconstitutes the Sanhedrin at that time, and they set out trying to figure out what are we going to do now that we don't have the sacrificial altar system. What are we going to do? Well, Hosea 6:6 says something about not sacrifice, but prayer. I can't remember exactly what it says, but it really brings that to light. So they started developing this whole new system, which we call rabbinic today, rabbinic Judaism, which will morph over the next hundreds of years by lots of writing and documented of oral tradition. That stuff they write starts building a case for their position. And by the way, part of their case for that position was squashing this concept Jesus was the Messiah. So for the next few hundred years, they write this. Today, the Jews believe the main document they study is the Talmud. The Talmud is the documentation of Jewish oral tradition that supposedly follows the Torah. But tradition has become more and more central to Judaism. And the role of the rabbi has grown over time. So this is really, I believe, the beginning, the birth of the current Jewish or Jewish system. So why did they reject Jesus? Well, at the time, they considered Jesus was a blasphemer. The Lord is one, it says in Deuteronomy. No, three people. No, one. The Lord is one. Jesus challenged a lot of religious tradition and teaching. He challenged a lot of that. And he didn't try to overthrow the Romans. I mean, good grief, that's what the Messiah is supposed to do, is kick those people out. Didn't do that. They kill him. I mean, what kind of Messiah is that? So they just rejected it at that time. I think later on they add a lot of other things in this writings. They document a lot of other things to kind of bolster these things. So, they said, he wasn't a descendant of David. Even you say he's an adopted. Joseph isn't his father. So if Joseph is not his father, that's through the fathers where you get your lineage. So he's not of the house of David. There's no way. Okay. And your mother's doesn't count. And by the way, today, one of the definitions is if you are a Jew, is your mother a Jew? And have you converted to Judaism? Those are the two criteria for if you're a Jew today. At that time, they said, nope. Okay. He certainly didn't bring anybody back from the exile at that time. This is afterthought, right? He certainly didn't rebuild the temple. It was still standing. He didn't do that. There isn't worldwide peace. We know that. And they don't believe that the scripture says there's a first coming and a second coming. We'll get into some of this next week. But they don't believe that. Okay? Which is so, and we certainly didn't introduce at that time the universal knowledge of God, the study of the Tanakh. Okay, so that didn't happen. So that's kind of